A very dangerous storm system is coming to the United States over the next few days, and this will bring a ton of problems, including a risk for a severe weather outbreak, which includes damaging winds, large hail, tornadoes, and some tornadoes could even be strong. There will also be a major fire risk that comes out of this big storm system, and there's also a potential for a blizzard. So in today's forecast, we're going to break down everything that you need to know about this storm system that is coming to the United States. We'll begin with what's happening across the country today, and the good news for right now is that things are looking relatively quiet. Not really much happening right now in the Great Plains or along the East Coast. Really, the only area that has any activity is back over along the West Coast, where we are anticipating a lot of snow and rain today, and this storm is what's going to bring the threat for a severe weather outbreak on both Friday and Saturday in the Great Plains and even back into parts of the Midwest, the Ohio Valley, and the Southeast. Now let's talk more about the severe weather potential over the next few days, and we'll begin with today, which we actually have a slight risk of severe weather in place across parts of Oklahoma, Arkansas, Texas, and Louisiana, where we are expecting at least a couple of storms to fire off tonight that could produce some significant hail and even maybe an isolated tornado or two. Notice that the Storm Prediction Center has actually put in a hatched risk for large hail this evening, which does indicate that we could see a couple of storms that produce hail as large as the size of tennis balls. So make sure that you are protecting your vehicle. The tornado risk is conditional, but we may see an isolated tornado, and if for some reason there's a storm that looks like it's about to drop a tornado, we will be live later today, so make sure you are subscribed to the channel. This threat is mainly going to be from about I-35 and eastbound, but I really think this is the corridor where our greatest tornado risk is going to end up lying, which means the Dallas-Fort Worth area probably not going to see much of a tornado risk. I think it'll be more than anything if you see something, large hail. Now, as we go into Friday, we are talking about a very concerning setup. The risk of severe weather is literally massive. This is one of the biggest severe weather risk areas that you will ever see. We have a marginal risk that extends from almost central Minnesota back to the Gulf Coast. We now have an enhanced risk of severe weather in place, which now includes most of Illinois, Indiana, Kentucky, Tennessee, Mississippi, Alabama, Arkansas, Missouri, and as well as Iowa. And I do think that there is going to be room for an upgrade of severe weather down the road. I would not rule out a moderate risk of severe weather, but here's the thing. I think Friday is going to be a bit different than Saturday. I think on Friday we're going to be dealing with more of a Boeing segment of storms back over in the Midwest that'll produce damaging winds and embedded tornadoes in a line of thunderstorms. We may end up seeing a couple of discrete supercells initially, or even as we go into the overnight hours here across parts of the Midwest or back through the deep south, but it is a little bit more conditional right now. I think we're definitely talking more about a significant wind risk on Friday, but nonetheless, we're still talking about a potential for tornadoes. Now, Saturday has the potential to be a significant severe weather outbreak and even potentially a tornado outbreak. The Storm Prediction Center has already mentioned that there will likely be higher probabilities here for this risk of severe weather, which means a moderate risk and maybe even a high risk of severe weather are going to be in play. But let's talk more about what this exactly means. So right now we have an enhanced risk of severe weather, which again is a 3 out of 5 on the severe weather scale from the Gulf Coast back into Tennessee. We also have a slight risk that goes all the way back up into the Ohio Valley, where we could see some significant damaging winds, large hail, and the potential for a tornado outbreak exists, but that's mainly going to be a concern back over in the Dixie Alley, where we have a lot of wind shear in addition to quite a bit of instability and very high moisture content. It is setting up to be a dangerous day on Saturday, and the only thing that's really limiting this as of right now would be any sort of morning convection that we have or the storm mode, but nonetheless, I think we're going to be talking about discrete supercells and then even a line of thunderstorms that'll try to develop later in the afternoon into the evening hours, which could also pose the threat for some significant damaging winds. And the severe weather madness continues as we go into Sunday, where we do have a slight risk that goes from Pennsylvania back into Florida. Right now, this appears to be more of a damaging wind risk, but we also could see a few tornadoes. We'll be talking more in detail about this setup as we go into future forecasts. We're going to go day by day with the risk of severe weather, beginning with what's happening today. We will have an uptick of an isolated tornado risk as we get closer to 5 to 11 o'clock this evening. I think our main concern really is going to be in this region, which is northeast Texas and really southern Arkansas, northern Louisiana, where an isolated tornado or two will be possible. There's actually a pretty high amount here of wind shear and as well as instability that will be in place, but it is a conditional risk. It's definitely not a slam dunk forecast here, but I do think an isolated tornado will be possible. So I have multiple ways to receive alerts, and I also have a tornado action plan ready to go. And as I mentioned a little bit earlier, there's a chance that we'll be live later today, so make sure you are subscribed to the channel, and that is if if this risk ends up panning out. So for the timing, storms will likely try to fire around rush hour back over in North Texas, but there is going to be a cap, which means that there's a temperature inversion that should prevent really significant storms from bubbling up. But I think right around sunset or so is when these storms really get going, and that's mainly going to be over northeast Texas and southeastern Oklahoma, where large to very large hail, damaging winds, and perhaps an isolated tornado will be possible. Notice how this becomes a Boeing segment, and even by around midnight tonight, this does not look very impressive. So I think there's about a 3 to 4 hour window where there could be an isolated tornado here, and then eventually this fizzles out as we go into Thursday morning. Now let's talk more about the big storm that is coming from Friday all the way into Sunday. This is what it looks like as we go into tonight. Lots of rain and snow falling along the west coast. Some isolated flooding will be a possibility in addition to mudslides. By tomorrow afternoon, there will be plenty of showers across the west coast in addition to a lot of snowfall in the higher elevations, and there will be a chance for some isolated severe weather again tomorrow back over in Alabama, Georgia, and Tennessee, with some isolated damaging winds being a concern. As we go into Friday morning, that storm system is moving over the Rockies. Notice how deep our low pressure system is getting by Friday morning. We are anticipating very strong winds by Friday morning in Texas, Oklahoma, and Kansas, where wind gusts as high as 80 miles per hour will be possible on Friday. That is not from the severe storms, by the way. As we go into Friday afternoon, that is when the storm system is moving into the central plains. I honestly think our risk of severe weather is really going to ramp up as we go into the late afternoon and early evening on Friday. And I honestly anticipate, again, a Boeing area of thunderstorms to develop in the Midwest, where we also could see some discrete supercellular activity back over in the deep south in the lower Mississippi River Valley, where there is a lot more wind shear as well in place, which could also lead to a more significant tornado risk. But honestly, this area here is really concerning as well, where we are talking about a significant wind risk in addition to a few embedded tornadoes in this segment of storms that's going to stretch from southern Missouri all the way back up into northern Iowa and southern Minnesota. Now, what I think is going to happen is that we're going to have this segment of damaging winds and also some embedded tornadoes happening in the Midwest. Does not appear as if we're going to have much discrete supercellular activity, which would limit the amount of long track tornadoes that we would see up in the Midwest, which is good news. But I do think as we go into the late evening and into the overnight hours, this area down here in the deep south has to be monitored closely for a potential for a couple of strong or even long track tornadoes from discrete supercells. But I think overall we are talking more about a wind risk on Friday comparatively to a significant long track tornado risk. I think Saturday is completely different though, because as we go into Saturday, we are talking about a more substantial risk of severe weather in the southeast, where there will be significant damaging winds, some large hail, but also the potential for several tornadoes. It's going to depend though a lot on what the storm mode is, because as you can see here on the European model, it's a very messy looking setup right now as we go into Saturday afternoon. And if this ends up happening, the tornado risk could be limited a lot. But there's also a chance that if we have a lot less storm activity out there in the morning and storms really start to organize as we go into the afternoon with a large warm sector, there could be several tornadoes, and many of those could even be strong or long tracked. So we need to watch this very closely, but I think our greatest risk, no matter what happens, would be in Alabama, Mississippi, eastern Louisiana, and as well as western Georgia. Also, while all this is happening, we'll have the potential for some blizzard conditions back over in western Minnesota, eastern North Dakota, and South Dakota. And on Saturday afternoon, we're also monitoring the potential for some severe weather back up in the Ohio Valley, which for right now will likely be geared towards the late afternoon and early evening, with some damaging winds and maybe an isolated tornado or two being possible. But storms will likely be more elevated up here, so that should be more of a wind and hail risk rather than a tornado risk. And then as we go late into Sunday evening, storms continue across Tennessee, Georgia, Alabama, and Florida, where damaging winds and a few tornadoes will continue to be a possibility. And then as we go into Sunday, the storm system moves east. Honestly, this is most likely going to be more of a wind risk here across the entire East Coast. I think the tornado risk will be low on Sunday. And then as we go into Monday, this is all moving offshore before eventually we start to see some slightly quieter weather as we go into Monday and Tuesday. And then another storm system is possible by the tail end of next week. But again, we need to really focus on what's happening over the next few days. Now, I do want to talk a bit more about the severe weather setup for both Friday and Saturday and give you a bit more of an idea of where I think the most significant risk of severe weather will lie. On Friday, the one big problem that we've had over the last few days when it comes to forecasting is the amount of low-level moisture that's going to be in place. But this should not limit the risk of severe weather in the Midwest. The reason why is because we will have very steep lapse rates, and that means our temperature is decreasing rapidly as we go up into the atmosphere, which is very important here for severe weather. So on Friday afternoon, despite there being a lack of low-level moisture, we should still be talking about that that, QLCS tornado risk that'll produce some damaging winds and some embedded tornadoes. But one area that I'm really watching for late Friday evening would be back over in the deep south, where we will have a lot more moisture coming out of the Gulf, and that should lead to a more favorable environment for maybe a couple of discrete supercells as we go into the late evening and overnight hours for a couple of strong or even long track tornadoes. Now, for the time being, again, this is a more conditional risk, but it's definitely going to be something we need to watch for very closely. And then on Saturday, the amount of moisture in the Ohio Valley is still lacking, but we'll still have steep lapse rates, but I think hail is more of a concern up there on Saturday. And then further down to the south and west, we have a much more favorable environment from Kentucky all the way into the deep south for the potential for significant damaging winds and maybe even several tornadoes, and a couple of strong tornadoes will be a possibility. Also, I just want to mention that some people have been comparing this event to April 27th, 2011, which was a significant tornado outbreak. Obviously generational. We never seen anything like that in our lifetimes. However, I do not think we're going to see anything like that. We still have a very different setup from that event, but I do think that this is comparable to many tornado outbreaks that we've had in the past in the southeast, and I do think that there's going to likely be several tornadoes, and a few of those could be strong and long tracked, which is hence why I do still think a moderate or even a high risk of severe weather is in play. But again, I just do not think this is going to be something like April 27th, 2011. Now, as we go into Saturday, we are starting to see a lot more energy in place. Over the last 24 to 36 hours, computer models have been uptrending with a lot of moisture, wind shear, and as well as instability here in the deep south, in addition to a large warm sector, which will likely lead to significant severe weather. What I'm showing you here is the Energy Helicity Index, and the GFS model has values between 4 and 7, which is not something you see very often, and usually when we get over the number 4 or 5, that indicates that there's a potential for even violent tornadoes. Now, I'm not saying that is definitely going to happen, because again, storm mode is critical. In addition, how many storms we have out there in the morning on Saturday. If there's a lot of storms and the storm mode is pretty crappy on Saturday, I honestly don't think we're going to see much in terms of strong tornadoes. But if we do end up seeing a large warm sector, which that's what it's trending towards as of right now, we definitely have a potential for a more significant and robust tornado outbreak in the southeast. The NAM model is also coming in, which is more of a short-term convective allowing model, and it's also indicating that there is a very favorable environment here in the deep south as we go into Saturday afternoon for tornadoes. So we need to watch this very closely. Make sure that you're subscribed to the channel and click the bell icon down below, because we'll likely be live on Friday and as well as Saturday for the majority of the day, covering both severe weather outbreaks. And lastly, we are anticipating many days of fire risks across the United States, and it all begins today, where we now have a 3 out of 3 fire risk back over in southern and western Texas, which that means that there's an extremely critical risk of fires. Please do your part in preventing fires and also spread the word. Thursday is basically the same. We're still talking about a significant fire risk there across the high plains. On Friday, we're right back to the central and southern plains. On Saturday, we're mostly in Texas and New Mexico. Sunday is probably going to be a bit more of a break day, but still a risk there in South Texas. And then Monday and Tuesday will be right back over to the high plains and even back up into parts of Kansas. Also, do not forget to follow me on Facebook and Twitter, which is at MaxVelocityWX. This is a place that we post a lot of rapid fire updates throughout the day when videos are not being released, when we have new details about a significant severe weather event. This is one of the places I definitely recommend you follow, because we have a lot of updates regarding severe weather events, in-depth opinions, all that sort of stuff. So make sure to go check this out. I'll leave links in the description below for all of this. And just a reminder that our 1 million subscriber merch is still available at shopmaxvelocity.net, including our signed hats, t-shirts, mugs, and stickers. This is one of the best ways to support our channel and what we do here, so if you want to check this out, it is at shopmaxvelocity.net.